Cool. Well, hello everyone. Today is May 23rd, 2021, and this is your episode 288 of the At Percussion podcast. With me today, as always, are Casey Cangelosi.
Hey, how's it going, Ben?
Doing well. How are you, Casey?
Good. Potty training.
Yeah. Are you in full summer mode at this point, Casey?
Yeah, yeah. You don't.
Excellent.
There's no such thing as potty training not in the summer, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's never been done, I don't think.
And Karli Viña is also with us.
Hey Ben, no potty training here. I'm happy to
Excellent.
report.
And Karli, I think you had a gig, didn't you?
I did. What a remarkable thing to report on, right? Full
Yeah.
orchestra. Yeah,
What'd you play?
it was fun. We played the Ravel Piano Concerto in G major and Mother Goose Suite, which was pretty awesome. I had never played either of those pieces, so it was nice. And I was thinking, I've played at like a couple of gigs this year. It's been like here or there. This was the first. I keep thinking, what's the first? This is the first full orchestra gig with live audience inside a concert hall, and it wasn't that many people. The house was maybe like 10% full. But yeah, it was nice. It was with Palm Beach Symphony.
That's awesome. Yeah, the Ravel piano concerti are pieces that I don't think we really study in music history or anything, but I've heard the left hand concerto and I guess one of the regular concertos and just mind-blowingly good, really, really interesting stuff. So that's awesome.
My student won the concerto competition here with the Ravel left-hand concerto on marimba.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Freaky. Yeah,
That's
freaky,
awesome.
freaky. And Karli, I played Mother Goose Suite. I've played all the percussion parts because we did one of those Zoom collages.
Oh,
So I played everything and spliced it all together. Yeah, it's really nice.
Casey, can you tell me, please, that your student didn't just play with his left hand? He used both hands on
I
marimba.
know, right? So it
Is
doesn't
that
count.
okay? That's good. Makes
Yeah,
me feel a little bit better about myself.
it doesn't count
Uh,
both hands.
Well, this episode is going to be released on June 10th, 2021. So if you're listening to this on release date, a few items in history that happened today. In 1840, Franz Liszt gave the first ever concert called a recital. In 1865, Carl Nielson was born. And of course, we have the Nielson Clarinet Concerto with that famous snare drum excerpt. And the big news item I wanted to talk about today is in 1865. Wagner's opera Tristan und Isolde premieres. And if you're familiar with music history, you know that's a very significant work in the Western music history canon. And a little bit of research about it, I found interestingly that one place that was a potential location for the premiere was Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and it was going to be in Italian. There was actually some sort of materials sent back and forth, it seemed, but that eventually fell through and it was ultimately premiered in Munich. It's a landmark piece in the development of Western music, particularly harmony. And so, if you look at the Romantic period, one of the biggest developments that happened throughout the Romantic period was that dissonance was prolonged and harmonies went unresolved for longer periods of time. And so, in this work, he sets up this famous chord at the beginning that we now call the Tristan chord. And this is what it sounds like. And that dissonance that's set up there is actually unresolved until the very end of the final act of the opera. And so, this prolonging of dissonance idea that happened in the Romantic period the baton would be eventually passed to Schoenberg. And if you listen to Schoenberg's early works, they sound like very, very advanced late Romantic works. And then ultimately, Schoenberg had the realization that when you prolong dissonance for that long, the ending point actually loses significance to the beginning point, and he said that basically harmony was no longer relevant, and that's where we got the 12-tone technique and the second Viennese school came from. So that's our today in music history. Casey, you're nodding like you had something.
No, I was just doing that thing when you nod, like, yeah, I know all that.
Oh,
Like, yeah,
it just
I remember,
giving the
like,
illusion of intelligence.
oh yeah, it's not even, yeah, Tim is, yeah, doing the more accurate thing for me there, but yeah, it's nope, it's just like automatic when someone's saying stuff that I don't remember
Yeah, if
from
someone says
school.
Wagner, you just, oh, yeah.
Be like, oh, yeah, yeah. But you're right.
Well,
That was like this. They talk about the Tristan chord because it's like the start of the whole progress into atonality and all of that, and it just
I will
started with
say,
crunchy chords.
speaking of trying to sound smart, I've never actually been entirely confident in my pronunciation of the opera's full name. I always just say Tristan. And I sent to our group chat today, does anyone know how to correctly pronounce this? And no one replied, so I don't think anyone here
I
knows.
just, I just nodded. I did the nod thing. I saw your question. I went, uh-huh.
I saw it and I was like, I have to resort to Ksenia on this one, our
Yeah, this is why we need Ksenia.
pronunciation
Ksenia's
guide.
sadly out today. Ksenia's got a big recording project going on right now. But without any further ado, I would like to get to our guest today. Our guest today is Tim Genis. Tim is the principal timpanist of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and he also teaches at Boston University. As a self-described Hawken snob, Tim has developed a versatile line of timpani mallets. His students have won positions with the Hong Kong Philharmonic, Boston Symphony Orchestra, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, and several others. So welcome to the podcast, Tim Genis.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you guys. And I'm not potty training anyone right now.
Okay, good.
Oh, there you go. Now you can't edit that out, Ben,
That
or else
didn't-
it'll be irrelevant to that.
Yes,
That must
excellent.
be nice.
Well, Tim, we had several months ago, at this point, we had Neil Grover on the podcast, and I'd like to actually start with this sort of topic. Someone asked Neil Grover, they said, it seems like many of the Boston Symphony percussionists, and Neil is a frequent sub with Boston Symphony, have had some sort of innovation in creating products and marketing them, whether it's Vic Firth or Neil Grover or Tom Gager, and obviously Tim Genis also has his timpani sticks. So Tim, could you tell us what's going on in Boston that makes people make their own products?
It seems to be this sort of thing that happens with everyone who's in Boston, that they want to get involved with the product making biz. And I did it for the same reason that I think, Neil and Vic and, Frank and Tom all did, that we just wanted something that wasn't available at the time. So, I mean, there's obviously thousands of sticks, timpani sticks out there, or at least hundreds. But there was something about most of them that didn't quite fit what I was doing. And so I wanted to get something that had better balance. That was my main issue with how the timpani stick is balanced and how it throws off the head. And so I wanted to try to create something that had something where I could alter the balance and still have a organic type stick, not a like a carbon fiber thing, because I tried all the carbon fiber stuff and I never could make it work. It just didn't feel natural to me. It didn't sound natural to me actually either, for some reason. And so I figured out a way to sort of fill parts of the bamboo with a weight enhancement, and I can put that weight enhancement in different parts of the stick depending upon how thick the bamboo was. So it took a long time to sort of figure that part out, but it took like 2 or 3 years actually. But sometimes I inject air into it to create a little space, and sometimes I inject sort of this weighted powder, like lead powder, within a hardening formula that is injected into the stick, then hardens, and then it's stable. I couldn't find anything out there that was like that, so I just started messing with it on my own. And I think Vic did the same thing when he started his stick business. I think most of the businesses are ones that are very in tune with actually being a business, and that you make a lot of money. And mine doesn't do that really, because I do all the sticks myself, and I'm not in it for to make a huge profitable big business. I'm in it just to have a really good product, and it kind of took off a little bit because word gets around. But I don't advertise these things. It's all word of mouth. But I'm at the point now where I can't really keep up with the orders. So because it's just me, and then I've employed, some students here and there to do sewing, and my children actually do some of it as well, because they want jobs.
I was going to
So
say, now that they're potty trained, yeah.
yeah, so they do some of that as well, and it's kind of a fun little side thing that I do. But it's I'm proud of the sticks. They're there's nothing like them really, and it's what I use them all the time, and I don't play any other kind of stick at this point because I just kept making sticks that would fit what I needed. And so at this point, there's about 20 different models of timpani sticks out there. So it's I don't know if it's contagious within Boston or not, but it's certainly something that I think a lot of people in Boston do. I think Tom Gager did it for the same reasons, and so did Vic, and Neil certainly is in there as well. So, there you have it.
Do you think it's because percussion is still just kind of young? I mean, we still like, I feel even just on this podcast, gosh, we've talked about, Ben, the famous Bartok, like, so how do you do the cymbals? Do you use the hi-hat rig, or do you pass the cymbals to the percussionist? What do you do? It's like there's all these different tricks and how-tos, and I guess, I don't know, do you think eventually we'll figure all of our tricks out, and our rep will be really, I guess, stable, and we'll be done making stuff eventually?
Well, I don't know. I think there's always room for something new. Just when you think everything's been done, then somebody comes out with something else that you haven't seen before. And I remember when, I went to school with Dave Herbert, and he kind of was one of the first people to start using carbon fiber. And, he was using golf club shafts, basically. And I don't think before, when we were in school, I don't think there was anything like that at this point. It's kind of taken off. There's a whole bunch of companies that are making that sort of thing. So, and 20 years down the line, there's going to be other things that that aren't there. You might see like self-tuning timpani. My wife threw that. My wife's in the orchestra actually, and she threw that at me when we were having dinner, and she said, "What if you had something that as some sort of electronic apparatus that could actually hear the pitch of the orchestra, take in whatever aid that it's hearing, and be able to tune the timpani from the pressure of the head?" And
I want that.
it's like, wow, that's really complicated, but it could be but you never know. Like, in 20 years, it could be something where it's, auto tuning, which is, kind of a sellout, but, there's room for plenty of innovation, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, I think to go along with that, there's that quote from the Steve Schick book where he talks about, like, B.B. King didn't play guitar. B.B. King played Lucille. Like, that was his guitar's name. That's his specific instrument. And Steve Schick goes on, of course, Steve Schick is brilliant, but to talk about, percussionists by our very nature, we don't play the snare drum, we play a snare drum. We play whatever snare drum is there, or timpani, or whatever, any other instrument. So I think the sort of theoretical existence of our instrument is, I don't think we'll ever reach that point of where it's kind of boring and we all use the same fingering system, and I don't think we'll ever get there. And I kind of like that, although it would be nice if marimba bars weren't all different widths.
But you know what I mean? Like the bar talk, like eventually, like we'll have this conversation, and other percussionists will have this conversation enough times that it'll be like, this is really the best way to handle that.
Yeah, but I mean, look at
the
Carter March is an old piece in our repertoire, and everyone does the mutes a different way.
Yeah.
But Tim, I had a question. I wanted to pitch a product idea. What do you think about a vibraphone that it was battery powered, so it would charge, and then you could unplug it and bring it on stage, and it would have a battery that would turn the motor, so you wouldn't have to have like an extension cord?
Well, I think, with anything electronic, you're looking for trouble. So, there's got to be that time when the battery runs out too early on you, or,
But it's like a laptop
like
battery,
that.
so you can use it plugged in too. Royalty free if you want to produce that product.
Is this something that you're thinking about making? Is that why we're
No, I've started. I've just like introduced this idea on the podcast so many times, hoping someone would pick it up. But so far, everyone's shot me down.
That's surprising.
No Adams or Yamaha or anything. Yeah, really disappointed with that actually. But Karli, I think you had something.
Most people say that sounds like an interesting idea. At least we'll
And
keep talking about it, Ben.
yeah,
Yeah, did I say that? Did
royalty
I say
free.
it was
Anyone that's
interesting?
listening.
I think
Yeah,
I said it could be
I don't
wrought
think
with
Tim
love.
said that, but
Well, I don't know. I think, the whole, you know, ideology of being a percussionist is always it the nature of our instruments and how we play, and how we create music. It's always, you're always looking for some type of way to make it your own, I think. And so I think with that comes, just sort of the musical interpretation, and then also the actual equipment interpretation. Like if you take the cadenza in Shostakovich 1, the timpani cadenza in the fourth movement. It's just timpani. And when I played it the first couple times, I just sort of read it like any other student does, and played it loud, played it a little bit softer, and played it very soft. But then you'll get an idea from someone, or you get an inspiration that you've seen or heard, or a conductor will say something. And Kurt Mazur said to me that he wanted it to be much more violent, and then much more like you're almost dying at the end of it. And at that point, I if I'm going to play it that soft, I can't play it with the same mallet that I started with. So I'm switching mallets that I never even thought of. It was something that I just did on the fly, and played it with one hand the last time, when you play it pianissimo, and played it much slower, and did all these little differences or nuances that I hadn't really thought of before. So you're constantly innovating, I think, in this business, either musically or product wise, to create something individual, you know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of innovating and, developing your own sound, Tim, I was a student in Boston at Boston Conservatory from 2009 to 2011, and I went to just about as many BSO concerts as I could, and I am grateful to have heard you play as many times as I did. And so thank you. It's wonderful to meet you. But I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about when, maybe in the early years that you were in Boston, how did you kind of develop your sound within the orchestra and your sound within Symphony Hall? And, I'm sure that influenced the development of mallets too at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I started as the assistant timpanist under Vic Firth, and that was in 1993, and did that for about 10 years. And so, I had kind of my own ideas about how to play timpani, but looking back on it now, I really had no clue really how to play timpani when I first got into the orchestra. I didn't even like have a concept about controlling roll speed and all this other stuff that I sort of do naturally now. So I really think when you're taking an audition, or when you win a job, hopefully what the committee is seeing in you is sort of the potential of what you could become, which is very hard to do. I mean, as someone who has sat on many committees, it's really hard to know if someone's going to really develop or fall off. And I guess that's what probation is for. But as far as my sound goes, I really, I obviously got influenced by Vic a bit, having spent 10 years watching him. And, I really did watch him like a hawk, and I had no idea what he was about, to be honest. I knew he was really famous and he made sticks and all this stuff, but, and I'd heard him a couple times as a student, and I thought, yeah, he's a good timpanist, I guess. But then when I sat behind him, it was a whole new world, as far, because he used these huge big puff balls for sticks, and usually he maybe had two pairs, maybe three pairs for a concert. I never saw him use more than two or three pairs. And he would get all these colors, and he would get all these like nuances, and he would get all these, and he was playing on plastic too. It wasn't even calf, and he made them sound like calf. To be honest, there was just this really big warmth in his sound, and I really liked that. And he was a genius at placement, and just all this stuff that I was taking in, and I was trying to grab all of it. And then once he left and I stepped over and replaced him, that's when I started really futzing around with lots of different things. I mean, Cap was not allowed in Symphony Hall when he was here. He didn't want anything to do with it. And so I had no experience on calf because it wasn't at, when I was in school, there was no calf in any of the schools. Juilliard didn't have any calf drums. It just wasn't something that we did as Americans. And then we slowly, got into it, I think, just from sort of, it seems like my generation started doing it because Dave started doing it. And then as soon as I got this job, I wanted to look at it. So I took, the summer off, went to Europe, studied with Marinus Comst I spent a month with him. And I spent a month with Wieland Welzel from Berlin. And I was like, I want to learn from these guys. I want to just see what they have to offer. And they just threw tons of stuff at me. And I learned how to, I visited hard key drums and watched him make a set of drums for me, and I helped him make them. So I wanted to learn everything about timpani. And then once I started futzing with it and being, ultra confused about, what to do because I had so much information at that point, I just had to do trial and error. So I started using calf on ringers. I started messing with mallets. Like, these mallets are just too thuddy on calf. So I needed lighter mallets. And so I just, I used everything. I usually would buy mallets and then mess them up. I would change them and, rewrap them in certain ways and do all this stuff. And I found that, using a ball mallet was best. I found the cartwheel mallets were didn't have enough tonal color for me, didn't have enough bottom or something in the sound. It was something that, so I would mess around with, mainly ball sticks. And that's when I just kind of started making my own. I started grabbing some mallets from Japan, from Kato, is sort of a famous bamboo timpani mallet maker, and got some ideas from him. And then I, started with this weight thing. So it was just a kind of a process over, being in the hall, playing at Tanglewood, experimenting with heads. I think the only way to really get to know how to do that and figure it out is just a lot of time, a lot of experimentation. I could just remember being in the hall, like recording myself from different angles, having our recording engineers record me, listening to, my drums played by my assistant. Like, I would tell him, like, hey, you mind using these sticks for this part? And let me see how it sounds. And, so a lot of sort of grunt work almost that takes a lot of time. And, ultimately, I think that's the way any player has to do it. They have to just spend time researching and fiddling with it and keep tweaking. And, I'm never going to be done tweaking things. I'm still, even the mallets that I have for production that I sell, there's several generations of them always coming out. But it's like, oh, this is going to be better. So I'm going to change this one little thing, and it actually makes the weight balance better, or something about it. So I think if you get to the point where you're like, I don't need to figure anything else out, I've got it all, then I think that's the time to retire. I think as a performer, as a musician, as an educator, you always have to have that curiosity factor, always sort of going through your head and wanting to learn, never being that kind of person that knows it all. I try to watch as much as I can and listen to. We're in the age now where we can access anything on the internet, and so it's great where you can just grab all this information and oh, I didn't know he did that, or whatever it is. So I really just sort of developed everything through curiosity and experimentation. It's I don't know if I have a unique sound to me, but it feels like it's something that I do that I don't see other people doing, just because this works for me. And if it works for somebody else, great. So I think that's how most, Floyd Duff didn't really have someone say, hey, you should do it this way. I'm sure he's got an idea from a conductor from Zell or something, and then tried something and then made it his own, and Goodman and all those guys. I'm sure they all did the same thing.
Did Vic ever say why calf was just not allowed? I mean, to some of our young listeners who probably haven't messed with calf, bass drum heads, timpani heads, it can be a very big ordeal, and if you don't know
Yeah,
what
I
you're
was gonna
doing,
say,
your
I
heads can
Yeah.
I actually
crazy.
I saw a video of Dave Herbert, and it's like he's like the first one to the orchestra hall and has to tune up the drums and get everything in good shape in order just to be able to play them. So yeah,
Yeah, and there's, it's funny. I mean, to answer Casey's question, I know exactly why Vic didn't want to use calf, because it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Because you got to be there early. He liked to show up like, well, actually, he showed up like 20 minutes, half hour before. He would noodle around and on the drums, but he didn't want to have to mess with the heads. In the time that I was there, he never changed his heads. And I mean, there were plastic heads. To be honest, you don't really need to change them if you take care of them. And he had those old heads from the 70s, which were, if you can get if you want plastic heads, if you can get your hands on the ones from the 70s, those were the heads to get, the Remo heads. They're incredible. I have a set of ringers actually here at the house, that have those heads on them. And I have not changed them at all, and there's not a single dent in them. I mean, they look new, basically. So he just, he spent years at Tanglewood before plastic was invented, having to deal with calf out there. And I tried calf at Tanglewood, and I will never do it again. And you can't do it; it's impossible. The humidity is just way too high, and it's too unpredictable. So he did it for convenience sake, and he made it work. He made plastic work. So.
Yep, cool.
all the talk about futzing around with mallets it's just seems like double reed players. I mean, Carly's married to a bassoonist. I'm sure there's wood shavings everywhere. I mean, it's just a constant. It's a craft that goes along with the art of performing, and it's incredible to me the great timpanists that can do that like yourself. But Tim, I wanted to ask also for maybe some of our younger listeners don't even know that Vic Firth was actually a person before it was a brand. And Vic Firth was, like you said, the former principal timpanist of Boston Symphony. He passed away in 2015. And I've heard a lot of interesting stories about Vic Firth being kind of a prankster. And can you tell us about Vic Firth, the person, a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know if he was a prankster, but he was kind of a cut up, and he always had a funny way of describing things, and a funny way of making the situation hilarious, just through just like a little comment, or like, at one point he started calling me Ichabod because I was so skinny, because I wasn't eating when I was like, practicing timpani and stuff. He's like, yeah, you look like Ichabod. So I don't know. And so, but as a professional, and as sort of, the guy that, I was assisting him, you could not ask for a better colleague. I mean, he was so professional and so supportive, and he never, I don't think once ever said, you should really try doing it this way, or he never told me how to play, which he could have, because I didn't know anything, to be honest, and he did. But he knew that, I'm just going to trust this guy and let him do his thing, and if it, hopefully he'll figure out how to make this whole thing work. And he did. And I never had to say, listen, how are we going to play these? Like oftentimes in Berlioz or something, you have to play something exactly together with two sets of timpani. And he never explained how he was going to do it, because he didn't need to, because the way he played, it was just so obvious where we were going to put things. I didn't even have to look at him. I could just see in the corner of my eye just this prep of how he prepped notes. And because I've seen a lot of double timpani players play, and I'm like, boom, boom, boom. It's like, oh, they're not really together. And you have to be, and you have to figure out, and it's the assistant's job to figure out how to do that. But it was super easy for me. because it was just so obvious of where to put it. And to be honest, he made it easier for the whole orchestra. And I noticed that. I even had heard the concertmaster come up to him and say, "Hey, can you lower your stand? Because I like to just sort of out the corner of my eye see your stroke a little bit." And I was like, wow. So, it is true that the timpanist is kind of the leader of the orchestra in certain situations. So I picked up on that very quickly and figured out also how to sort of get that type of motion into my playing, because it's not just playing. It's not just, you want all that, the sound and all that other stuff. But the orchestra really is relying on the timpanist. I mean, and so I sort of developed a sort of kind of the way, when a fiddle player plays, he sort of does this head nod to prepare the string section. I kind of started doing something slightly similar, not quite, but it's just something that, I happened upon, and it really works great. I mean, I do it and the whole orchestra like latches onto me. And so, your role as a timpanist is, there's a lot of things that you have to sort of consider, and you can't really get that until you've been in the job for a while, and figure that part out. So, I picked up a lot of little things from Vic along the way, and he was, I can't say enough good things about him. He was, I miss him terribly, and I always look forward to, working with him. And he only listened to me once, and it was when I was preparing for his job. He actually asked, he said, "Hey, why don't you just play some of this stuff for me?" And so that was 10 years into the job. And I think that was the first lesson I ever took with him. And it wasn't really a lesson. He just, I played some stuff and then he played some stuff. And I sort of, looked at it and said, "What are you doing there?" And what struck me about that, when we did that, was we played Mozart 39, or I played Mozart 39, and then he played it. And we were playing on his drums, and I went through it. It was, like, "Oh, let me just play it for you." And he played it, and he was playing really far into the head towards the center. I mean, not ridiculous, but it was a lot more than I would have did. And I was standing over him, and I was standing right at the drums, and he did it, and it sounded great. But to me, it sounded a little fuddy because he was so far, close to the center. I was like, "Vic, why are you playing so close to the center?" He's like, "Back up 30 feet." And I did, and he played it, and it sounded completely different. And he did the exact same beating spot. And I was like, wow. And then he played it towards the edge, and I was like, yeah, that sounds kind of unfocused as far as the tack goes. So, uh, it's just these little things that happen along the way when we were working together. And mainly it was just me just observing. I was just trying to pick up as much as I could from the guy. I knew he wasn't going to be around forever, and but he was a pleasure to work with, and I do miss him quite a bit.
Well, I love that you mentioned about the role that the timpanist plays in the orchestra and the concertmaster watching him. And, I think sometimes we might not realize that, especially as students, that really matters. And I think those are the skills we get from a lot of chamber music and percussion ensemble. And then you realize in a professional orchestra, like, absolutely, you're communicating across the orchestra and across the section that way.
Yeah, and it's something that it's the hardest thing to sort of teach students of that part of the job. I mean, they're so worried about and concentrating on all the other things, that like intonation, just like the fundamental stuff. But that stuff, you really can't get it until you've entered the job and been on the job for a while. And then you also have to know the people you're playing. Like, I know certain people are going to play a certain way, and I know they need a certain amount of cue that might be different from somebody else. So, and just, the fact that, the hall resonates a certain way. I know certain notes resonate better than other notes, and all halls do that. I mean, whether you realize it or not. But like at Tanglewood, I know A flats really get out to the back of the hall a little bit quicker than G's, which is, so, I don't necessarily take that too much into account when I'm playing, but I kind of do a little bit. It's in my head, and that was part of that experimentation. You know, trying to what I was hearing when I was out there, listening or whatever it is. So yeah, there's a lot of different footholds that you need to put yourself into when you're in a job like this, and you always want to keep getting better. You want to make your orchestra better, and you want to give the players should that you are playing with, hopefully they're thinking, this guy is so easy to play with. That's what you want. You want them to think that about you. If they're kind of looking back and like, I don't know about that, then you better either fix it or well, you better fix it, or else you're in trouble. So anyway.
It's so refreshing to hear all the good stories about Vic Firth, because there are so many people that when we get people that are very talented or that are excellent businessmen, they're not always the nicest people. And I've only heard the nicest things about Vic Firth. I know Lee Howard Stevens, actually, I guess probably in the early 80s, Vic Firth created a line of Lee Howard Stevens marimba sticks. And Lee eventually said, I think I want to kind of go my own way and make my own business. And he said Vic was the nicest person about being supportive, helping Lee set up his own business, which would obviously go on to compete with his own business. And I've just only heard the nicest things about him. So that's very refreshing.
Yeah,
Um,
Vic really made it, I mean, he did the same thing to me when, because I have a line with him as well. And when before I was even the principal, he said, why don't you make a set of timpani mallets? We'll market it. We'll have mine, then we'll have yours. And I said, oh, okay. So that's when the persimmon sticks came out and all that stuff. And even when I started my own business, Vic was still there helping. Like they were making the cores, some of the wood cores for me, because I didn't have time to lathe them. I didn't have machine lathes or computer lathes like he did. He could do them much quicker than me. So he was helpful in that. And he had this sort of treasure trove of sticks that he'd tried that no one has ever seen. They were like flannel sticks, and like they're nothing that I've ever seen before. And so he's sort of been around the block enough to know like all the little pitfalls. He's like, if you try this, it's probably not going to work too well, or you're going to spend too much time with it. And he's like, you don't want to be straightening your own bamboo. You got to have someone in China doing that, because you'll kill yourself. And he was right, because I tried doing it, and he's right. There's no way you can do it yourself. It's just because
yeah.
There's no machines that can straighten bamboo for you. You have to do it by hand, because every single piece is different. So it's impossible to do, because you don't shave bamboo. You have to actually straighten it and then rub off the nodes and all that other stuff. And so so he kind of set me on the path that way. But yeah, totally supportive. Wasn't afraid of the competition. They offered to market my sticks for me, but it was not going to work out price wise. So he said, you do it for a while, then like maybe later. So JG actually offered to to do my sticks as well, but I sort of didn't want to do that either.
And also, I mean, just the volume that Vic Firth worked in. I mean, there was a picture that went around when he passed away of him just looking at like a gigantic tree trunk, and it was like, this is the wood for one day of the world's drumsticks or something like that. I mean, just
right,
that's
yeah.
unbelievable.
They do 90,000 sticks a day.
Unreal.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. If you go to the factory, it's
So
really
that means there's probably at least 90,000 drummers out there. I'm shocked.
Well, half that. I mean, they come in pairs. So.
Oh, you're right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. That's a relief. Yeah, you're right.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Scared me for a minute.
Next BSO audition is going to have 90,000 people show up. Well, we had some news that I wanted to discuss today. Less good news, sadly. But Tim shared an article on Facebook that I read, and I wanted to invite him onto the podcast to help us discuss it. So this was a March 15th article from the New York Times. The title of the article is "The Met Opera's Musicians, Unpaid Since April, Are Struggling." And so a little bit of background about the Metropolitan Opera. They shut their doors on March 12th, 2020, and furloughed most of their workers, including those in the orchestra and chorus, obviously because of the COVID pandemic. In the fall, it made the offer to its musicians that it would resume partial payments in exchange for long-term cuts, and the unions resisted these. And then, a quote from the article, it says, "By the end of the year, the Met Orchestra was the only major ensemble without a deal to receive pandemic pay, according to the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians." The article goes on to tell stories of several metropolitan musicians. About 40% of them have left the New York area, some of which have moved in with family members. About 10% have retired, including the assistant principal double bass who retired early. One cellist had to sell his precious 19th century Russian bow to make ends meet. And all the meanwhile, the Metropolitan Opera was putting on Met Stars live in concert pay-per-view recitals, which did not feature orchestra members. Most of them featured piano accompaniment with opera stars. The orchestra staged some of its own, the orchestra musicians, I should say, staged some of their own virtual concerts, clarifying that those were not affiliated with the Metropolitan Opera. And on April 30th, the Dallas Symphony Orchestra invited 50 Metropolitan Opera musicians to perform with 50 DSO musicians in a performance. I might have just said this of Mahler's First Symphony, in case I didn't say that. This benefited the Met Orchestra Musicians Fund and Dallas Fort Worth Musicians COVID-19 Relief Fund. It was a hugely well-received concert, and there's actually a full recording of it online. They had to sort of build the stage out to leave room for distancing between players and so on, but they managed to do it for a lessened audience in the Meyerson Symphony Center. On May 16th, there were the first two in-person performances featuring members of the orchestra chorus and its music director, along with 4 soloists. They presented a 45-minute program to an audience of 150 at the Knockdown Center, notably not the Lincoln Center. The program attempted to reflect recent hardships and offer comfort and hope. It included 3 black soloists and an aria from Terence Blanchard's Fire Shut Up in My Bones, which is planned to open next season in September. It's the first work by a black composer ever presented by the Met. Also included on that program were the Lacrimosa from Mozart's Requiem, Ave Maria from Verdi's Otello, and others. Like I said, their official reopening is planned for September. They reached a deal with the union representing the chorus, according to a May 11th article, but there was a May 17th article that said the orchestra musician is still ongoing in their talks. So, Tim, like I said, you were the one that shared this article. Could you tell us your thoughts about this, especially as a professional working orchestra musician?
Yeah, well, it's a really sad story, to be honest. I mean, I think it's just unconscionable how the Met handled this. And I know a lot of the musicians in the orchestra, and I mean, before any of this happened, I would get stories about, the amount of waste that the Met does, what they spend their money on. And I mean, the orchestra is their most valuable commodity. I don't know of any other orchestra, too many other orchestras, especially in that upper echelon, that just cut off their lifeblood like that without, they could have definitely supported the musicians, but they just didn't want to. The attitude, I know, is we'll just replace you if you guys leave, or if it's okay. There's plenty of musicians out there, and that's just ridiculous. I mean, the way Boston handled the whole thing was, we didn't even dip into our endowment. They buckled down. They said, "Listen, we're struggling. Let's compromise. Let's work together." And they gave us a really fair deal, keep us alive during all this. And the people who are making the money or raising the money went out and raised, $30-40 million during this pandemic to keep things rolling. And I don't think Dallas even took a pay cut. Funny enough, the executive director of Dallas was the head of marketing in Boston. Just recently, she took that job about a year ago. But to cut off the musicians completely, It's BS. It's they didn't need to do it. The money is there. They just didn't want to spend it. They just think, well, we want to spend it on something else. We're gonna, like these recitals or whatever. We're gonna on production or whatever it is. I'm certainly not on the inside of the Met, but it's that's a huge corporation. Um, they've got millions of dollars coming in with donors. Uh, it's got a huge history, and they just did it because, well, we can spend our money somewhere else. That's what it has to be. They just don't want to spend it on the musicians or the chorus or the people who are needing it. So what are these musicians going to do? They have to
Yeah,
sell their instruments. It's
yeah,
ridiculous.
and well, apparently, yes. And I
Right.
mean, beyond that, it was like not only, I should mention, not only the orchestra musicians, but also the chorus, the stagehands, which it sounds like at a certain point the stagehands were locked out of the building, as well as I don't know the technical term, but the set builders, they were outsourcing their set building. Like there was a company in Wales that was doing some of it. It's just absolute madness beyond just the musicians, the entire everyone that artistically works for them to see it being handled that way.
Yeah, and it just doesn't register to the people that are making this decision that ultimately they're just killing their product because the morale is it's morale is something very powerful in an organization like a symphony or an opera orchestra or whatever, any kind of arts organization. And if you don't feel like you're being treated fairly, it does something to hopefully as a professional musician you're always going to play with the most integrity that you can. But when someone basically says you're not worth it, that you can't get your mind past that. And different people can, different people can't, but it's going to affect you, and in the end it's going to affect the total product. And to be not taken care of in that level of musicianship, I mean, those players are unbelievably great. Um, and it's just unconscionable to me. It's really sad. And, it's. I almost want to say, ban the Met. Don't even bother. But you can't say that. It's because I love the organization as a musical organization, but I just not a fan of Peter Gelb. So.
It does make you wonder though, like so what do we need to do? I mean, given that yeah, like the supply of musicians out there is more than the demand out there. You say the same thing about university professors. It's like, oh, they're moving a lot of hours to adjuncts, and they're getting rid of. So many universities are getting rid of faculty lines any chance they get to save money, and because they know they can be replaced, and they know they'll find someone else who will do it for less, so on and so forth. I mean, we know that conversation, but we had Jason Haheim on before all this happened, and it was great to visit with him all those years ago. And then he and I shared TEDx percussion seminar. So we're both teaching at that, and then yeah, hearing him after. I mean, it's just amazing, like how he's still in good spirits and like still moving on and finding other things to do and staying busy and keeping his artistry just going. I mean, it's just really, really commendable and admirable. And I guess what I would ask you, Tim, is so given they don't care, or they're just, you know, what do we do to make them, hurt? Like I think something like the Met, like, they're thinking like, well, we survived all the bad press from James Levine for 100 years.
Right.
We can probably survive this bad press. It's like, what kind of bad press do we have to like? Like they're probably just immune to bad press.
Well,
It's like,
yeah, I think you're right. And the sad truth of it is that there's really we are replaceable. That's the sad truth about it.
right.
That's so I sort of keep that in my mind when I'm thinking, I'm going in for a raise, and if they don't give it to me, I'm doing this. And it's like, no,
Right.
you're not going to do that because I am replaceable. And with all corporations are are going to do whatever they can to bottom line their profits. And some have different sort of ideologies about, what's important. Are the dollars more important than the humanitarian effort, or, taking care of their employees and creating a family? They all have different um, sort of mindsets with that. But I don't know. In my experience, it usually comes down to the money, unfortunately, which is
Well,
sad.
that's why I think, yeah, wouldn't enough bad press make them start to think about it as a money issue? It's like, okay, great. So if y'all are evil bastards and you don't care about people, cool. What do you care about? Oh, you care about money. So can we attack you and somehow make enough bad press and make a big enough stink about it that you'll start to feel it as a dollar problem? And I guess what I'm saying is like, geez, I don't know. They didn't care about James Levine and all that. Like, could he get more bad press than that? Probably not. It's like, man, what can we possibly do?
Yeah, it's really, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, And I mean, the only thing that's going to probably affect or make change is if they lose sales, if people stop going.
And then that affects the musicians. So you've kind of
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So, I, in the end, I don't think it's worth it to do as a musician. For me, I'm only speaking for myself, is to get wrapped up with it. I think at the end of the day, doing what I do and doing it the best of my ability, and because I know when I'm on stage and I'm playing something, I forget about all of my troubles. So I try to remember that. And whether or not I'm being paid fairly, or whether or not, I'm being screwed here, or, everyone's going to sort of feel that in their life at some point or another, that they could do better, whatever, or someone's taking advantage of them. You try your best to sort of plead your case, and, hopefully at times in your life you'll get a fair shake. But if you are playing to the best of your ability and doing the best job that you can, and being the best person to your colleagues and being respectful, and I think at the end, that's gonna, for me, that's gonna make me happier. I don't know what, in answer to your question, Casey, I don't know what's gonna create change, something like that. Because like you said, Levine had his issues, and they sort of looked the other way, and we had him for a while, and we all knew what was going on basically with him. But and then until something happened where lawsuits were being thrown, that's the only time that corporations say, okay, now we'll jump on the bandwagon and say we're against this completely. So because the Met knew what was going on.
Oh yeah.
With all of that, and it was funny because James Levine hired me. He was the music director when I had to take the audition for Vic's job.
Huh.
And
Wow.
and to be honest, he never did anything that I saw that was
Sure, of course. Yeah.
out of line for me.
Most of the time, yeah.
But I was worried one time, because he sort of liked to keep you on the string. He didn't want to give you tenure right away. He kind of wanted to keep you going so he could kind of control you and mold you into his kind of player. And I knew this about him because I got warned by everyone who had went through this process. And I was like, okay. So sure enough, my first tenure meeting, my probation meeting came. He's like, well, let's just take a little bit more time. And I was like, oh God, here we go. And so did, and I just said, I'm just going to play, the way I think I should play, and, give him what he wants, and blah, blah, blah. But at one point, it was actually on my birthday. I got a call from my management saying, Levine wants you to come down to New York. And I'm like, why? He's like, well, he just wants to talk to you. Because he was doing the Met and Boston at the time. And so I was like, oh, great. And he's like, he wants you to go tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, okay, which was my birthday.
And
So
he wants you to wear this.
Well, I was thinking, what is going to happen at this meeting? And so I went down there, and it was snowing like hell. And I waited. I got to the Met, and his assistant said, well, just wait in the hallway. And I waited for an hour and a half or something, and I finally went in there, and he had like 2 red velvet chairs, and he said, sit anywhere you want. And I went to sit down in one of the chairs. He said, oh no, don't sit there, sit in the other one. So I sat in there. I was like, this is gonna be weird. And so, and what's funny about that meeting was, like, I'm not going to say on this podcast what was going through my head, but I was thinking, whoa, I don't know. But at the end of the day, after the meeting was over, I don't know I can't remember a single thing that was said in that meeting. I honestly can't. It was just a bunch of like blabber about, well, we do this, or we'll do a Fledermaus, and it was just him talking. He loved to talk. And I was just listening and nodding and saying, okay, right, let's do that. And it was the biggest waste of time that I could imagine, because I can't remember a thing that happened with it. But I was kind of relieved after the meeting was over. It was like, well, walking out of here, I'm fine. And then he tenured me about a week later. So
Wow.
Whatever was said in that meeting worked, which I don't know what was said. So there you go.
I wonder, like the takeaway from all this to me, like, it's like, okay, this horrible things happening in the Met right now, and of course to a lot of symphony orchestras, and I mean a lot of just musical institutions with COVID, and people don't know how to handle the lack of being able to perform, and other places are taking it as a way to change their funding and do all these things. But I guess, like, the big takeaway, it's like, okay, well, to young people out there, like, looking for jobs and hoping to get jobs, whether it's orchestra or anywhere else, it's just like, I guess, try not to put yourself in the situation where once you get the job, if you lose it, you'll be screwed. Try not to make it so, like, wow, okay, I finally got this job and I really, really need it. I mean, it's like, we want the jobs so much, and they're so competitive, and they're so tough to get, that we're willing to go into crazy debt to get them, and we're willing to do so much. But, like, hey, you once you get it, it could go away. Keep in mind, it could go away. Be careful the situation you put yourself in once you get it. That's like maybe the only thing you can control.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen tenured musicians. Technically, when you're tenured, you don't lose your job, but I've seen tenured musicians lose their job, get fired, because of the way they were and the way they played or whatever. So you really, no one is, a colleague of mine said, every one of us is replaceable. And I was like, yeah, you're kind of right. Everyone is. I think, the better takeaway of this is, if you love doing what you're doing, if you love playing music and the type of music you're playing and the instrument that you're playing, it really shouldn't matter. All those things shouldn't matter at the end of the day. Because I remember when I was a student, I was like, man, I will take a job. I don't even care what it pays. In fact, I was taking jobs where they didn't pay anything. And I remember having colleagues at school say, oh yeah, there's this gig down in Greenwich Village, but it only pays $25. And I was like, really? I'll take it. That's great. It's
That
like,
was me too.
you should not care if it pays a dime, at that rate, because if you're in it for the money, you really can't be. It's not the profession that we're in. We don't do this for the money. It's nice to make money. It's nice to be successful, yes, and it's nice to be able to provide for your family. But if you work really hard and you keep trying to up the ante, you'll make ways to make things work, and still be in your profession. That's what I believe. I mean, that's what I have tried to do, and I have thankfully been successful at it. But I know people who aren't as successful, but they love what they do, and they do it, and they do it really well, and they're still very happy people. Mm-hmm. So, it's if you don't absolutely love what you're doing, then it's probably not gonna work out too well. I think
it's too tough of a business to not love it. That's why, the advice that everybody gives, and I think we all received at one point, was, if you can imagine yourself doing anything else, just go and do it if it'll make you happy,
Exactly. That's exactly it. I remember sitting in Davies Symphony Hall in San Francisco before I went to college, and just like sitting in the hall alone. I'd been practicing then, just looking up at the ceiling, like, I can't imagine doing anything else in this career. So I remember that was the time that I decided this, I'm going to do this, and that's all I'm going to do. And so I just put all my eggs in one basket, and I was like, this better work because that's all I'm going to do at this point. So anyway, that was me. But Tony Cerrone told me that as well. It's like, if you don't absolutely love this, don't do it because it's too hard.
Right.
Right. And I think that's the way of any career. I think, if you're really successful at it, you probably love what you do. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, to have a career that keeps you engaged and it's a constructive, positive career, I think it's hard no matter what. But so much of this story with the Met is just really disheartening to think like these musicians have reached what a lot of people would consider one of the best jobs in, like, you're at the peak, like this should be an amazing experience, and then all of a sudden the rug was pulled out from under them. And I'm wondering, has it changed your perspective at all on preparing students for orchestral careers, knowing that you can work so hard and do everything exactly right and be very lucky and get a top job, and then the bottom can fall out?
Yeah, I well, that and COVID have, I mean, obviously COVID is the reason for a lot of this, but the response because of COVID has, definitely made me think about how I handle my students. And, before any of this happened, I generally would, make sure that I try to be as honest with my students, but not break their spirit, because it's, you want them, because one, I never know. You never know if they're really going to make it or not. So I can't say, listen, you got no prayer, buddy. It ain't gonna happen for you. I can't say that to someone because I might be full of it. I might not know, and this person could surprise me. But there are some truths to our field, and in that, you know, you're not going to be a millionaire, most likely, um, in this job. Um, you are replaceable. You know, if you're not willing to work, and keep striving to get better, you're probably going to have problems later down the line. So, you know, I kind of can sense with some students, where they are commitment wise. And so I'm being a little bit more like fielding questions from them saying, are you willing to do this? Are you willing to do this? Are you willing to do that? And most of them tell me what I want to hear, to be honest. But at the end, if I probe and I keep probing, usually the truth comes out. So I'm trying to really sort of get people to sort of understand what it is that you need to do for this career, and that it's, and open their eyes to, really what it actually takes. Because I think a majority of students have no idea really of what it really takes. I've had some students come through and play, and they played for me, and I'm thinking, oh man, there's so many issues here that we have to back up on. And sometimes I ask, like, how do you think you did? I was like, I think this is one of the best times I've ever played. And I was like, okay, so what do I do with that? I don't want to knock this person down. I want to give him a reality check, or her a reality check, while still having hope out there. So, I think as educators, we have to be really careful about, not alluding to what it really takes to be in this field, sort of beating around the bush with it, but and also being able to inspire at the same time. Hopefully these students come to their own conclusions about it, about what's realistic, what's possible, and do I really want this kind of work? Because, when I was in school, there were a lot of 14-hour practice days, a lot. I mean, it was up at 4 a.m. It was in bed by 11:30 p.m. And it was every waking moment of practice that I could get. And that went on for a few years. And I don't see too many students doing that. Like I'll roam the halls every once in a while at BU and there's nobody there. And I was like, what is going on here? Why is there anybody practicing? Um, I think at one point in your life, you can't have a life other than music. You have to spend every waking minute making and figuring out how to be a great musician. And it's not going to happen overnight. It takes a few years at least to get that under your belt. And so I I figure, do it when you can do it. If you have a family, it's going to be next to impossible to do that. But I mean, not that it is impossible. It can be done, but I did it when I was in college. I was unattached. I had no life. I knew people, but I wasn't like social. I just didn't have the time for it, and that's just me. That's how I handled things. And fortunately, I don't have to do that now. I mean, it's all ingrained and I can do my own kind of practice that's, you know, on the job type practice. But, you got to spend those hours. And unfortunately, I think, we're in the day of immediate gratification. This is the age where kids can go and get anything that they want because of the technology that's out there very quickly. Like when I needed to study a particular symphony, I had to go to the library, get the record, have a turntable to play it on, play it, find it with the needle, all this stuff. Or when I prepared for the Met audition, like when I was, whenever, however old I was, I had to find all those spots in the opera. So those records were like 4 records long. It took me like days to figure that kind of stuff out. But now you can just pop it up, you can type it in your computer, find it within 10 seconds. And I think kids are used to that. A lot of students or amateurs don't realize that there's no shortcut. You have to spend the time. You're not going to get that immediate gratification, and it's not going to happen overnight. So I see a difference between the student that was around 30 years ago and the student that's now. And I even see it in my kids. And so we keep trying to warn them about, there are no shortcuts here. You have to spend the time, and you might be able to get information quickly, but it's not going to happen for you unless you put in the effort and be ready for it to take years. Because I find that kids give up quicker than, than in my days of growing up. It's like, well, this isn't working. I've spent 2 weeks at it. I'm going to move on to something else. So like, okay. So anyway, it's a different life, there are different times.
Yeah, when you're used to finding it so fast, yeah, you get trained, I guess, to well, rather than sticking with this and figuring out, I can more quickly find something else that'll do the same thing, or give me what I'm looking for in less time if I just abandon what I'm currently looking at and go to the next thing.
Right. Right. Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, hey, thanks to Ed Choi for the question. We had that Facebook question about auditions, but I think Tim covered his experience right next to Vic Firth quite a lot. But thanks a lot for the question, Ed. Yeah, I think we got around a lot of that pretty well. So yep, thanks again. And let's see, I just thought we'd, end with something a little, I don't know, just this lighter, because Ben had to do his top dark thing.
Blame Ben for it.
You couldn't leave it alone, could you?
Yeah, couldn't leave it alone. Yeah, come on, Ben. You've got a job. Just be happy. Can't you be happy, Ben? But I just always like asking, especially orchestra musicians, like, what's your favorite rep to play? And especially as a timpanist, can you include what you think about solo timpani rep or concerto rep? Because that's always a fun ongoing conversation. The solo timpani pieces and such.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because if you asked me what my favorite rep was, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I could probably spit out, I definitely like to do this, this, and this. But nowadays, I find it's whatever's in front of me. To be honest, I love to play Bach on timpani or Mozart. It's just because it's always something like that you have to figure out and make your own and try to understand the history behind it. What were timpani like back in those days? Do we want to replicate it, or do we want to, bring it to a modern era at this point? And so it's kind of whatever I happen to be doing at the time. So it's a crappy answer, but it's the idea behind it is, every time you do something, it's different. Like we play Beethoven 9 every year. It's the last Cangelosi concert. I mean, we obviously didn't do it last year. There's no time to it, but so I've done it a lot. And every time I do it, there's a little something different that I notice, or that I didn't take into account, or I do differently, or the orchestra is doing differently, and it changes my perspective. And I can play it from memory at this point, but I still find that it's like, oh, I never noticed that little nuance that was happening over in the in the oboes there, and that kind of affects how I'm going to play this over here. And so it's really whatever happens to be happening. Unfortunately, it's in the orchestra. There's a Boston Symphony chamber players, and that often ends up being a lot of non-timpani stuff. So I kind of get to dip my finger in, believe it or not, I can play mallets every once in a while, and other things. So it kind of keeps my chops going a little bit in those areas, and it's a lot of fun because it's very different. Unfortunately, the thing that ends up being played in that group mostly is l'histoire. I mean, not unfortunately, but so I'd kind of like to branch out into other things, like Dupu with some stuff that's really interesting for chamber, for settings, in that regard. So anyway, it's kind of whatever I've been doing. That's the answer to the first. What was the second part of the question?
I was wondering, maybe just like once and for all, you could finally decree that like solo timpani is kind of drag. Like maybe can we stop with that?
If you didn't like the answer to the first part of the question, you're really not going to like the answer to this part. No. I have an interesting story about this. I am not a huge fan of solo timpani repertoire, and believe me, I'm sure it's great, and it doesn't mean that I am decrying it in any way. But my belief with timpani is that it is not a solo instrument, because it doesn't lend itself to have that solo quality. Yeah, you can play solos on it, but it's something that I can't dive into it fully believing in it. And the thing that did it for me was, well, not the thing, but one of the things is, this is really bad to say on a show like this, but when I was at PAS, I was presenting something at PAS at the convention, and they have this thing. PAS is usually Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but Wednesday they had sort of a symposium of just one sort of topic, and the symposium was solo timpani. So they had over 30 or 40 different solo pieces being played on Wednesday from like 7 a.m. to midnight. And I went to everyone that I could go to. I went to all of them. And I came out of it going, oh my God, I wouldn't play any one of those things. I just can't see myself playing that stuff. And I think it's just an instrument that works so much better in the role that it's supposed to be in the orchestra. And it's, any other instrument can do it, but I mean, that's not to say timpani can't do it. It can do it. I just don't believe that it's something that I can put both feet into when I do it. So and so I'm waiting, I'm hoping that there's stuff written, and that doesn't mean I haven't played solos. I've played them, quite a few, and I try to make them as lyrical as I can, or I'm trying to make them make sense musically. And they're needed out there, but like when we do auditions for BU or for, Tanglewood, often, we skip right over the solo timpani stuff. I'd rather hear a solo marimba piece, solo snare drum piece. All I need to do is hear maybe one excerpt on timpani, and I know that if the person can play timpani and can understand the instrument. Usually Beethoven 9 can sort of answer any question about if the person knows how to treat the timpani as an instrument. Unfortunately, it's it's a terrible answer.
Well, that's great. It's what
but
we
it's
hear
the
a lot.
honest truth. It's just how I feel. So
Yeah.
I've been asked, like Paul Yonchis is asking dozens of times, like, hey, we got this thing by Phil Glass. It's 2 timpani. Why don't you come over and play it with me? And I'm like, nah. I'm okay.
I guess I was going to follow up with, what about any concerti? But I guess that answers my question.
I was asked to play.
Really?
Actually, Levine called me in and said, "Listen, I want Carter to write Elliott, because Levine loved Carter. We did every single Carter piece that he wrote. It was numbing how much Carter we did." And he said, "I'm going to have him write you a timpani concerto." And I was like, "You know what? No, don't."
Wow. Cool.
I would. The only composer that I would have considered having a concerto written was Duthieu, Henri Duthieu, the French composer who died, I don't know, about 10 years ago, I guess. But he was doing a lot with the BSO when I first got into the orchestra. He really knew how to write for timpani. All his symphonies, and any, like, all the little stuff that he wrote, Shadows of Time, all that kind of stuff. He really knew the instrument, and he really knew how to, make the harmony almost be more melodic in a timpani sense, but made it work better than anybody that I could see. So I would have did that. So that's the best you're going to get.
Cool. That's great.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for your generous time today. It's been such a pleasure to get to talk to you, and we will see everyone on the next episode, number 289.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being with you guys and girls.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.